Been spending most our lives living in a gangster's paradise. Been spending most our lives living in a gangster's paradise. Keep spending most our lives living in a gangster's paradise. Keep spending most our lives living in a gangster's paradise.
3, 2, 1, roll 5.
In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. Good evening, friends, and welcome to the 8th episode of Crime and Punishment, a very legal podcast, not political. This is the podcast of the Invictus Law Firm, PA, a criminal defense law firm in Orlando, Florida. The website for which is augustusinvictus.com. That's me. I'm here with my trusty co-host, Tiger Jen. Tonight we are trying a new system. We are simulcasting not just here to YouTube, but also to Twitch, DLive, Periscope, Facebook, everything else we could get our hands on. So I put the links for all of those in the description, so you can look up all of those, follow them just in case something happens to the YouTube channel, because as much as we love Big Brother, we understand that Big Brother sometimes needs to remove people who are saying undesirable things. It is double plus good that Big Brother watches over us in this manner. So please do subscribe to those other sites in the description. We took a poll on Twitter, speaking of other social media, and all 26 of the voters, well, not all of them, but the majority of them, said that we should do not just every Monday, but we should do a daily show of Monday through Friday. So Crime and Punishment would be Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We are not equipped to do that this week, but that might be coming in the near future. Tonight we are going to continue our discussion of Gerry Spence's book, Police State: How America's Cops Get Away with Murder. Mr. Spence is, of course, famous for being the attorney for Mr. Randy Weaver. That story is chapter 1 of the book. We are in the middle of chapter 2. For those of us who missed last week's episode, we are reading The Secret Lies of the FBI, which is the second chapter of Mr. Spence's book. It is about the Brandon Mayfield case back in 2004 when the bombings happened in Madrid. Short recap. The bombing happens. They pull prints off of a plastic bag that was at the explosion. They run the prints. Some fingerprint fragment, somehow, in what Mr. Spence calls tragedy of errors, they come to believe that this fingerprint belongs to Mr. Mayfield out in Portland, Oregon, because he was an honorably discharged Army veteran. He was an attorney, and he was Muslim. When law enforcement thinks they have an attorney, trust me, I know 6 ways from Sunday, they think this is a big target, and then they're going to get that guy. All evidence be damned. Also, back in 2004, some of you are Zoomers, you don't know this, but back in 2004, we were in the middle of some serious terror here in America, and not from the Muslims, but from the Bush administration. And anybody who was Muslim was getting what we would now call the white nationalist treatment. So the FBI in certain periods of history, they have their target group, they have their group that they do not like, they have the group that the public doesn't like, so they go after those guys, they make a big show of it. We pointed out in the last episode the various periods of history where the FBI has gone after anarchists, they've gone after communists, they've gone after bank robbers, and then most recently the white nationalists, but before that it was the Muslims. And the story from this chapter 2 of the book is about that period of time. Post 9/11, bombings in Madrid, FBI thinks we've got a big fish here, and they line up this fingerprint and it's just plain wrong. So we've got Tiger Gen has got actual statutes related to police spying. We're going to go over that. As an introductory comment, I'm going to point out a phenomenon in criminal defense, in law enforcement, and it's called tunnel vision. It's this psychological phenomenon where cops will get a case, they think this is what happened, this is the suspect, and despite all evidence to the contrary, all of these officers in law enforcement will go with that suspect, or they will go with that theory of the case. So, bank robbery, they arrest a guy, they say this guy did it. That's the initial belief, right? Then they really want this guy and they start building the case. And this is the switch where they stop investigating what happened and they start building a case. So once they start building the case, evidence will come in. Well, actually, this person saw a different guy. This witness said that's definitely not him. This witness said the guy's hair was red, not brown. And the police just have they have tunnel vision. They are blocking all of this out because they know that is the guy. Or in other cases where it's not an instance of mistaken identity, it could be they have a pet theory of the case. Well, this is what happened. Let's not get personal here. Let's just say there are cases where there's not even... Look, cops get an idea in their head and they don't question it after that. And no matter how many pieces of evidence come in to prove that their original theory was wrong, it doesn't matter. They will keep going with it. Part of it is because of professional standing. Obviously, police departments get sued when they arrest the wrong person. They get sued when they put the wrong person in prison for years at a time, or for months at a time. They get sued when they destroy somebody's professional reputation. They go down hard when they do something like the FBI did in the Mayfield case, or like they did in the Randy Weaver case. So there is that. But there's also the fact of tunnel vision, where there are actual... there are cops acting in actual good faith. They really believe that this happened in the way that they believe it happened, in the way they originally thought it happened. They really believe this, despite all evidence to the contrary, despite legions of witnesses, despite mountains of evidence. They will believe, well, all of that really is just, hearsay or whatever, erroneous. What we really believe, that is what happened. And people will act in good faith on that. And it's not just law enforcement that does that. It's a very human phenomenon. So that is what we were dealing with in this chapter today. Tiger Jin, you have the statutes you wanted to discuss. Let's go over those.
Yeah, not all of these are immediately relevant to this Madrid case, but they are they're useful to know, and they're useful to know how this can happen, especially because most of these were created just 2, 3, 4 years before this case happened. A lot of people, they think that after 9/11 happened, that the only freedoms we lost were in airport security. That's what you always hear about. That's what's always brought up. But in fact, there's a good number of statutes that enable law enforcement to do many things like what you see with the Mayfields here, in spite of constitutional protections that we have. Now, what I want to do here is essentially go over my notes on these, because obviously with every single law, you're going to have case law interpreting it, and you can always still try and argue your constitutional defenses. But this is what we have here. The first one is this is an older one. These are called national security letters. The FBI can obtain personal information from third parties by making a written request in cases involving national security. No prior approval from a judge is needed. They can only request non-content information like phone numbers. They cannot talk about receiving the letter or what it is about. After the Reauthorization Act of the Patriot Act, there was a little bit of judicial oversight created, but that's for who the FBI is requesting the information from. So like if it's a phone company, the phone company, not the person the information is about, the phone company, it's on them to go, this is a little bit suspicious. Let's have a federal judge look at this request first. So for what it's worth, you have that kind of protection from it. But otherwise, the FBI, without asking anybody, they can just go and request information from third parties using these letters. The next one is 18 U.S.C. 2709. This is the Counterintelligence Access to Telephone Toll and Transactional Records. This allows the FBI to compel communication companies, so that's telephone companies and ISPs, to release customer records when the FBI makes a particular certification. The FBI needs to certify that this recourse is relevant to an authorized investigation to protect against terrorism or clandestine intelligence activities. This is not going to be the only law that I'm going to go over that allows the FBI to get your communication records. In spite of Fourth Amendment protections, there's a law right in, they can just do it. In 12 U.S.C. 314A, 5A, this is
all right, well, let's back up there for 1 second and point out to everybody that's lawyer speak for a federal statute. So USC is the U.S. codes, so he's citing a federal statute. And that's how you would look it up, is by, you've got the number for the volume, then you've got USC, then you've got the statute number itself. And then the numbers and letters after that are the subparagraphs inside of the statute. So that being translated, go ahead.
Yes, this particular federal statute is within the Right to Financial Privacy Act, but this provision of it allows the FBI to obtain an individual's financial records if the FBI certifies in writing to the financial institution that such records are sought for foreign counterintelligence purposes to protect against international terrorism or clandestine intelligence activities, provide that such an investigation of a United States person is not conducted solely upon the basis of activities protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution. So this allows them to go to the financial institution, and you can imagine all the kinds of things that they can get by just looking at your financial data. Things you bought, where they were bought. It can be something like that. There's a reason they want that. It gives them a lot of useful information.
Right. And once they have that information, they routinely will pull the security cameras from wherever you've been. So they see that you've bought gas at the Shell station. They'll pull the records there. They'll get the video of you at the gas station. They see you bought a wiffle bat at Walmart. They'll pull all of the videos from Walmart, and they'll track every movement that you make. It's very, and again, we love Big Brother on this show. We're not criticizing it. We're just saying it's incredible how totalitarian it is.
Yes, and which financial institution? How would they know? This is within. There's a little provision hidden within the Fair Credit Reporting Act, where they shall furnish to the FBI the names and addresses of all financial institutions at which a customer maintains or has maintained an account. So they would first go to one of the big credit reporting agencies, and then from there they can use the provision within the Right to Financial Privacy Act, and that's how they get everything. A little bit relevant to this story is something that John Ashcroft made in 2002, the Attorney General's Guidelines on General Crimes, Racketeering Enterprise, and Domestic Security Terrorism Investigations. So this is like, I don't know, I guess it's sort of a guidebook they would have, but a law, some guidelines in law. John Ashcroft made it that the FBI can gather publicly available information, whether obtained directly or through services or resources that compile or analyze such information and information voluntarily provided by private entities. The FBI can also carry out general topical research, including conducting online searches and accessing online sites and forums. So you got John Ashcroft to thank for allowing the FBI to realize the importance of open source intelligence.
And again, that was the Bush administration. And one thing I think we've mentioned once before is the irony of the Patriot Act and all of this legislation surrounding the war on terror back in 2001 and the subsequent years of the Bush administration. It was all ostensibly against Muslims, and that's why liberals were so up in arms about it. I mean, really, everybody was up in arms about it, except, the people who just wanted to bomb everybody because of 9/11. And I forgot where I was going with that.
Well, what it reminds me of is when I was going over these laws in preparation for the show, what I was thinking is where we're at now, it makes me think that the reason why a lot of news reports emphasize online extremism, he was radicalized by online communities. They want to create more laws like these, to allow them to get inside anything that's encrypted or private groups online and things like that. Maybe things that are paywalled, they want to get behind. I don't know what they would have difficulty getting access to, but I think even within some of these laws, I was going over one specifying that if the phone communication is encrypted, then under law, the phone company has to decrypt that information for law enforcement. And I just imagine maybe there's something like that they want to get behind for encrypted communications like Telegram. That's my guess.
Well, that reminds me of where I was going with that. I was saying it was ironic that this Patriot Act and all the surrounding legislation in the early days of the war on terror, it was ostensibly against Muslims, and immediately you saw them turn it against white nationalists. It was Matt Hale's case that really drove that home, and that's what I was saying. We mentioned once before on this program that Reverend Matthew Hale, he was charged with a federal crime, and he was convicted of that crime, and instead of just sentencing him, they literally doubled his sentence, and it was according to a hidden provision in the Patriot Act. It was a sentencing provision in the Patriot Act that literally doubled his prison sentence. So they sold it to jingoist, red, white, and blue white Americans. They sold the Patriot Act saying, this is about Muslims, this is about freedom, democracy, America, let's go bomb them. They sold it to them, and then they turned around and used it right against them. The police state marches on. That was the irony. Thank you for reminding me, Tiger.
The last law that I want to go over is the Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act. This is the one that requires, they have to do this, requires phone companies to isolate and intercept calls and be able to record them so they can be provided to law enforcement. If encrypted, they have to decrypt it. They have to have the ability to decrypt it. That is, the phone company, if they're going to provide encrypted communications, they have to have the ability themselves to decrypt it for law enforcement. So anytime you're making a phone call, it's being recorded. And if the police ask, the police gets it.
Yep. Despite everything we know about law enforcement and their tactics. And without further ado, let's continue our discussion of that. For those who are late to the program, we are discussing Gerry Spence's book, Police State, How America's Cops Get Away with Murder. And so what we've been discussing, Tiger's been going over actual statutes that allow for things like this, for not just the FBI, but local police, any law enforcement really that wants to get into your business. They want to use secret warrants, secret courts. The Fourth Amendment basically just disappeared thanks to the War on Terror. And so we are reading a story about one of Gerry Spence's cases where the FBI got a fingerprint off of a plastic bag in the Madrid bombing and erroneously matched it to the wrong person and destroyed this guy's life and his entire family because they got tunnel vision and they refused to back down, refused to admit that they were wrong. And it actually turned out to be the Spanish police who said, no, this fingerprint is not worth anything. And they ended up finding the guy. And it wasn't the American that the FBI was trying to pin it on in their show pony case. So I guess let's just go right back into the narrative. The Mayfield family began criticizing themselves for their unwarranted paranoia. Just the same, they double-locked their doors at night and found themselves whispering at the dinner table. They wouldn't say anything over the phone, not even the grocery list. They lay at night with their eyes staring at the ceiling, wondering, worrying, listening for the smallest of strange sounds. Now, for those of you who missed last week's episode, this is because of the sneak and peek warrants that the FBI was using at the time. Still using, I'm sure, but in this case, they were talking about how they would come home and things would be rearranged, the wrong locks would be locked, things were out of order, and it was very clear that something was going on. So then that old comforting refrain would return. Forget it. We have nothing to hide. There's nothing and nobody out there trying to get us. The demons are only in our minds. But no sooner did they vow to relax than their fear, as pervasive as their breathing, returned. This constant fear thing is a sure sign of mental illness, Brandon said. We have to stop this. A few days later, Shane was home with the flu. He heard noises. He looked out the window and saw a man trying to break into the house. Terrorized, he called his mother, but before she arrived, the FBI's lookout parked across the street saw her coming, and the agent left before she got there. Brandon and Mona wondered if Shane wasn't suffering from some kind of hallucination attributable to the fever of his flu. Besides, Shane had been reading that chilling Orwell stuff, which was the paragraph preceding where we started today. Shane at the time was ironically reading George Orwell's 1984. During the same time, the FBI secretly entered Brandon's law office. I might have mentioned Mr. Mayfield was an attorney. So the FBI secretly entered his law office, rifled through his confidential client files, installed electronic listening devices, and wiretapped his phone. The once sacred attorney-client privilege having been cast aside as collateral damage in our supposed war against terror. So think about that. The FBI breaks into a lawyer's home. The wrong guy, by the way. You might think to yourself, well, they had the right guy. I mean, he was clearly a terrorist, you gotta break a few eggs to make an omelet. But no, FBI had 100% the wrong guy because they were incompetent and matched the wrong fingerprint. They break into this lawyer's house, and that's not good enough. They then break into his office, violating not only his rights, but then they install electronic listening devices. They put bugs in his office, which ipso facto violates the Sixth Amendment right to counsel of every single one of his clients. Not just the clients that go into the office, but the clients that are wiretapped on the phone, the clients who, if they're going through his files, those guys, their rights have been violated because you have a Sixth Amendment right to counsel, you have the right to attorney-client privilege, and the FBI, as Mr. Spence here says, they just threw it out the window. Because it's the war on terror now. You have no rights. And again, it's like one of those things with COINTELPRO. Yeah, they shut that down in the 60s. So there's no way the FBI would do that again, right? The FBI would never go after political activists, right? That could never happen in modern America. We learned our lesson from COINTELPRO. You know better than that. And when you think, well, certainly the FBI wouldn't break into a lawyer's office and wiretap everything and, put their, just destroy the Sixth Amendment along with the Fourth Amendment and the Fifth Amendment. They just did that for the war on terror, right? Back, post 9/11, we've learned our lesson there. Nonsense. It's not, and the thing is, it's gotten worse now because it's not just the FBI now. The FBI goes around training local law enforcement, local and state law enforcement. They have information sharing programs. It is an entire network that the proles are lucky enough not to know about. But this whole system that we were all trying to fight back in the early 2000s, right after 9/11, it is now the rule, not the exception. And it is every level of government that does this now. To continue. But the European media was about to expose the FBI's botched Mayfield investigation. The Bureau also learned that the Los Angeles Times was ready to come out with its story discrediting the FBI's match. Sorry, I'm only reading 2 sentences, but that is super important too. As I mentioned in the last episode, a lot of y'all don't remember, or you weren't, if you're Zoomers, you just weren't there. So you don't know that back then, the media, believe it or not, actually attacked the government for violating civil rights. And to look back on that period of time now, 20 years later, it's surreal to think about it. The Los Angeles Times published a story discrediting the FBI's match of a fingerprint in a terrorism case. Can you imagine that happening today? Can you imagine the media today publishing a story that would discredit something in a case like the Ram case, or Reverend Hale's case, or the American Front case, any of these cases that you know full well about? Can you imagine the media stepping in and saying, the government has that wrong, the FBI is out of control, they're incompetent, this is not a real case, and this is a political prosecution? It's unimaginable today. But that was actually what happened back in the Mayfield case. Lucky for him. The Bureau had to act fast, and it concocted misleading and false affidavits in order to justify the arrest of Brandon Mayfield as a material witness. An FBI investigator submitted an affidavit to a sitting federal judge in Portland. This affidavit reiterated that the 3 previous fingerprint experts considered 17, that's the number they gave to the fingerprint, by the way, they considered 17 a 100% positive identification of Brandon Mayfield. No mention was made of the fact that the Spanish National Police didn't agree and had so reported to the FBI. Instead, the affidavit claimed that the Spanish National Police felt satisfied with the FBI's laboratory identification. Now, you might think that's out of the ordinary. I can tell you for a fact it is not. Law enforcement will never put in an arrest affidavit, well, we do have some doubts about this. They'll never put in an arrest affidavit. Well, there is exculpatory information, Judge, and let me tell you what that information is. They'll never say in their arrest affidavit, Your Honor, there were 3 witnesses who said it wasn't this guy that did it. They'll never put in an arrest affidavit, well, yeah, okay, well, there was this one witness who said it wasn't his fault and it was the other guy's fault, and actually that person was the aggressor. No, you will never, ever see that in arrest. I certainly haven't. I've never seen that in arrest affidavit. A cop saying to the judge, well, there is exculpatory evidence here, and never. Arrest affidavits are to guarantee the arrest of the person. And you might think that this is a solitary case where they lied in the arrest affidavit. I can tell you from personal experience, both as an inmate and as an attorney, that is absolutely not an isolated incident. Cops will straight out lie in an arrest affidavit. They will outright lie to a judge, federal or state or whatever. They will lie to a judge to secure the arrest of somebody, even knowing that there is exculpatory evidence or knowing that their technician was incompetent. They will get the arrest affidavit because law enforcement's position is that it's up to the prosecutor to figure out whether it's an actual case or not. It's not our job. Our job's to make the arrest. We're just cops. What do we know? And this is something we talked about in episode 1, where, episode 1 of this program, that is, where everybody wants to kick this down the line. The cops want to say, well, it's not our job to determine what happened. We're just making the arrest. They push it off to the prosecutor. Well, if the prosecutor finds out that there's, not a case here, then they'll drop the case. The prosecutor's going to get it, and I will say some prosecutors will throw out bogus cases, and that actually has happened to me and to my clients. Prosecutors will throw out bogus cases. It does happen. It's very rare, but it does happen. But most of the time, they will say, if there's some ambiguity in the case, or if they believe the alleged victim, or whatever the case, they will say, well, it's not up to me, it's up to the judge. If you want it dismissed, you file a motion to dismiss, the judge will decide whether there's an issue for the trier of fact, which is, of course, the jury. And ultimately, whether it's the prosecutor, or the judge, or the police, everybody passes the buck to the jury. Not elected, not professionals, no accountability whatsoever. You can't interview them. You can't question how they came to their decision. 100% inviolable, the jury. And everybody will say, well, it's up to them. They're the ones deciding whether a crime occurred here. They're the ones weighing the facts. It's all up to them. I have no responsibility. I'm just a police officer. What do you expect from me? I can't possibly investigate this like a jury can. I can't possibly do that. That's up to them. And if in the end, you show your side of the story and you've got a good lawyer, well, you might walk. You could very well walk, and then, the case is dropped, and then, life goes on. They never consider the fact that people like Brandon Mayfield, their lives are destroyed. They never consider the fact that his children are destroyed, or that, almost 20 years later, some guy's going to be on the radio talking about his case and bringing all this back up for their children. So my apologies about that. But this is a super important illustration of the fact that cops feel they just have absolutely no responsibility because they can pass that off to the prosecutor. And they abuse their discretion just daily. Daily, law enforcement abuses their discretion. And they pass the buck to somebody else. And that's what's going on here. They lied in the arrest affidavit. They said it was a 100% positive identification. They didn't point out to the federal judge that the Spanish National Police had said that they absolutely disagreed with the identification. Outright lied and hid information to secure the arrest warrant from the federal judge. So, to continue. These sworn statements from the FBI also focused on Brandon's association with fellow Muslims, as we all know, an activity fully protected under the Constitution. In support of search and arrest warrants, the agent included in his affidavit that Brandon advertised his legal services in a directory from Jerusalem Enterprises, known as the, quote, Muslim Yellow Pages, end quote. A cursory look at the website of the Muslim Yellow Pages, in air quotes, would reveal that major American car rental agencies such as Avis, motel chains such as Best Western, and airlines such as United also advertised on this site. In their searches of the Mayfield residence, the agents had even seized one of the children's homework for Spanish class, which the FBI offered as proof of Mayfield's connection to Spain. Maybe that didn't sound insane enough for you, so let me just pause and point this out. The FBI literally seized, like with a warrant, seized his child's homework from Spanish class and tried to offer this as proof that this attorney had a connection to Spain. If that is not insane, it's either insane or it's nefarious or it's the utmost incompetence, but it is not police work. You can imagine with Mr. Spence talking about the quote-unquote Muslim Yellow Pages and the FBI actually saying that this attorney advertising on this site for his Muslim clients, and remember, this guy is a Muslim. This guy advertising in these so-called Muslim Yellow Pages is evidence. Evidence for search and arrest warrants because his clients are Muslim. That is how they tried to connect him to a bombing in Madrid. And they used his child's homework as proof of his connection to Spain. Just let that sink in. How wild that is. And it happened in America. Not Saudi Arabia, not France, not some, crazy... America. In 2004, it's not like this isn't under the Obama administration, but now we see it turned around, right? It's not just for Muslims anymore. On May 6, 2004, Brandon Mayfield was arrested as a quote-unquote material witness and hauled off to the Multnomah County Detention Center, a euphemism for jail, like the York County Detention Center. That's what they call jail. There he found himself imprisoned with the usual collection of drunks, dope dealers, felons, and crazies. It was as if he'd stepped into the pages of Kafka's The Trial, having awakened to discover that he'd been charged with a crime he did not commit, the nature of which was never revealed to him, and that some impersonal, unidentified authority had taken control of his life. My God, does that sound familiar? Mona remembers, I was about to prepare my husband's lunch when the two FBI agents knocked on our door. I was vacuuming. I thought it was the mailman. She said the agents sat her down at her dining room table and began ransacking her house. I left everything as they left it. I didn't have the strength to clean up the mess, she said. On May 20th, Brandon was still in prison garb, staring out from behind bars, still caged with the desperate and degenerate, a man dazed and confused by a nightmare from which he could not awaken. He was a mass murderer? The presiding judge in Portland's federal court thought something must be seriously awry. Mayfield, a solid, ethical member of the Oregon Bar, had traveled to Spain and was somehow involved in an international conspiracy to kill innocent Spanish people? The judge needed convincing before he would issue a warrant for Brandon's arrest. No problem. The FBI brought in one of its noted fingerprint experts, who proceeded to show the judge the comparisons and assured him there was a solid match. Having no expertise of his own, the judge, like jurors in untold thousands of cases over scores of years, had to accept the word of that institution's expert. The judge reluctantly issued the warrant. Brandon Mayfield was as good as dead. By trial time, the jury would have been soaked in a downpour of media concerning the Madrid bombing. The stories would spare no words describing the blood and horror, and how Brandon, with his Muslim connections, had been irrefutably connected to this mass murder when the FBI identified his fingerprint on the blue plastic bag. He would be given a media nickname, something like the Muslim Bomber. Would the government really need a trial? The FBI's fingerprint expert would take the stand. Jurors know the FBI never errs in its fingerprint identification. The testifying agent's manners are impeccable. Of course, he's been chosen by the FBI to testify in this case because over the years, he's become such a powerful presence on the witness stand that the government always wins his cases. Occasionally, he smiles that trademark small, sad smile at one of the women, one of the motherly type. Yes, he says as a plain matter of fact, this print belongs to Brandon Mayfield. Will you identify Mr. Mayfield for the jury, please? The assistant U.S. attorney asks. Yes, of course. And the FBI expert points at Brandon. He's there at the counsel table, the gentleman with the beard and glasses who is sitting next to his lawyer. The jurors turn and stare at Brandon to see what his reaction will be. Brandon stares back at the FBI man. What else can he do? If he jumps up and hollers, "You're lying!" the judge will throw him in jail for contempt. If he says nothing, the jury wonders how he can be so cool, so unmoved by the agent's damning testimony. If he silently shakes his head in denial, well, that's what every guilty man would do. Soon the FBI experts put up those huge enlargements of Brandon's print alongside number 17, and with a pointer he shows the jury the ridges and the valleys and the jumps and the gaps, and after he's finished, there's little doubt in anyone's mind that that print belongs to that man sitting over there staring at the jury. Mean-looking bastard, the reporter from the LA Times whispers to his counterpart from the San Francisco Chronicle. Yeah, those Muslims are like that. Brandon can't afford the price of a famous defense attorney. Their home is mortgaged. He no longer has any income from his little law office. He's worse than broke. His family needs every penny he can beg or borrow to live on. The public defender is his only hope. And the public defender is no match for the assistant U.S. attorney who's been specially selected for this once-in-a-lifetime international case. Of course, Brandon's public defender will put on a fingerprint expert of his own, but his expert will be a retired police officer from somewhere who got his own training from the FBI and whose testimony can't stand up to the impeccable competence of the government's expert witnesses. At last, the jury is shown photos of the twisted, bloody body parts and the stacks of the dead from the bombing. The photos are in color, and so graphic the jurors almost retch. The jurors look over at Brandon. He is stoic as usual. His face reveals nothing. Then the jury hears about his connection to certain Muslims. He once represented a convicted Muslim terrorist. He's advertised in Muslim publications. He goes to the mosque and is a recent convert. He is obviously part of that dangerous worldwide hate group. When Brandon takes the stand to testify, he's still his stoic, unemotional self. As human and loving as Brandon is, he's laced with fear as he sits up there on the witness stand trying to defend himself. He denies any connection to the bombing. He only represented the convicted Muslim terrorist in a child custody case, and that was before he knew anything about his client's connection to Al-Qaeda. He was never in Madrid or anywhere else except home when all this occurred. The government prosecutor pounds him mercilessly on cross-examination. Where were you on the day of the bombing? The prosecutor demands. I don't keep track of my days. I had no need to. You're claiming you don't know? I was at home as usual. I was at my office. I was I suppose your wife and kids will testify to that, the prosecutor says, and you want us to believe them. Yes. I suppose that one of your Muslim clients can tell us where you were on that day. The prosecutor extends a long, knowing look to the jurors. The more Brandon protests the charges, the deeper he sinks into the morass from which he is trying to extricate himself. It's like someone being thrown into quicksand and trying to struggle his way out. One of my favorite questions to a witness by a prosecutor is when you've got a family member up on the stand, right? Like, I've got a client, he's charged with a crime, he's sitting next to me at the table. I've got his mother on the stand because his mother was legitimately a witness. She saw the police beating her son, right? So the prosecutor's cross-examining this woman. And of course, the last question always asked is, the defendant is your son, isn't he? Well, yes. Yes, he is. And you wouldn't want anything bad to happen to your son, would you? Well, no, of course not. And you wouldn't want to see him convicted, would you? And what they're getting at, and the jury knows it, it's getting into the jury's head. What they're getting at is, you're a mother of this man. Wouldn't you lie to save him? Wouldn't your testimony, if it were just a little false to help your son, wouldn't that be okay? Don't you think it's all right because you don't want him to go to jail? That's what they're getting at. You are lying in your testimony because you don't want your family member to go to jail. Dirty. And that's exactly what Mr. Spence is showing here in this book. I suppose your wife and kids will testify to that, and you want us to believe them. And Mr. Mayfield says, yes. Of course I want you to believe them. Like, what kind of question is that? The prosecutor knows what kind of question that is. It's a trick question. So, and what if Brandon doesn't take the stand? This is something that we've had in the comments in the chat a couple times. And what if Brandon doesn't take the stand? Then the jurors will later argue that if they'd been charged with such a heinous crime, they sure as hell would have taken the stand. They would have nothing to hide, and they'd fight to tell the jury and the world the whole truth. They'd never hide behind the Fifth Amendment, not for a damned minute. But this Mayfield, you saw him. He just sat there staring out at everyone. That's the trick of the Fifth Amendment, right? You plead the Fifth Amendment, you say, I'm not going to testify on my own behalf. Well, what is the natural thing for everyone who sees that to think? Their natural inclination is to think, well, he's hiding something. Jurors are not, by and large, lawyers, right? In fact, lawyers are almost always specifically excluded from juries because prosecutors and defense attorneys don't want a lawyer up there. Because lawyers have their own ideas. It's like herding cats with lawyers on your jury. Not that you would always exclude them, but I'd say 99% of the time they just happen to be excluded, right? So the jurors have no idea what the Fifth Amendment really means. Do most Americans really know what that means? When you see someone in a criminal trial refuse to get up and speak on his own behalf, are you thinking, well, that is a solid American citizen. That guy knows his Constitution. I respect that he is invoking his Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate himself at a criminal trial. Good for him. No, nobody thinks that. They think, what is this guy hiding? Why doesn't he want to take the stand? What is he scared of that the prosecutor is going to ask him? That's just human nature. That's what everybody's thinking. And the prosecutor, I promise you, the prosecutor knows that full well. To continue. And don't forget, we are engaged in a war on terror. Good Americans called to jury duty will do their job and vote to convict the accused if there is any reasonable evidence to support such a verdict. They know going in that the prosecutors wouldn't bring the case if the case weren't just. And the defense attorney? Their kind defend the Manson types and try to make them look like Mother Teresa's baby brother. Good Americans have to protect their families and their neighbors from these terrorists. If jurors won't protect themselves and the rest of us, who will? And thank God for the selfless service the FBI provides America. God bless the FBI. I love Gerry Spence. That is all. I did not add any commentary. That is really verbatim from the book. So, another thing about human nature. Like I said about the Fifth Amendment, you see somebody get up there, or in the courtroom rather, they're not getting up there. They're not getting up in the witness box. They're not speaking on their own defense. You're not thinking, well, God bless that guy for exercising his constitutional rights. You're thinking, what is he hiding? That's human nature. Likewise, you're on the jury, and human nature is to think, well, most people, especially in trusted positions, they're just people. Like, you don't become a prosecutor because you're looking to commit atrocities, right? You don't become a cop because you're looking to shove somebody's head through a plate glass window. You become an officer of the law because you believe in justice, you believe in order, you believe in the law and fairness. You become a prosecutor because you want to bring order out of chaos. You become a prosecutor because you believe in a higher standard of conduct. You believe in the law. You want to enforce that law. You want to protect the community and the state. So you go into a jury and you have these assumptions about people. And you think, well, the cops wouldn't have arrested this guy unless there was something going on. And the prosecutor's office wouldn't bring this to trial if it were a bogus case, right? So there must be something going on here. So automatically you go in as a juror thinking, there's a reason I'm here. And because most people are uninitiated in the law, they don't understand a lot of times the reason you're there is because the defense attorney and the defendant refused to take it lying down. You have no idea how many cases are pled out when the person is genuinely innocent. And it's not even because there's evidence against them. It's because they're held in jail without bond and they want to get out. And taking a plea is sometimes the only way to get out fast. It's because they're sitting there and their lives are being destroyed and they just want to go home. It's because in a lot of cases that I've seen, a lot of guys in jail, they are in there on domestic violence charges. They took the rap for their own girlfriend or wife or whatever the case because they didn't want their girl being arrested. And every time I see these guys, quite frankly, I tell them, you know you're retarded, right? That was a really stupid thing to do. Because now that you have told the cops, I accept responsibility for this, it was my fault, even though she just hit you in the face with a flashlight, right? Now your name is mud. You can't go back on what you told the cops to get your girlfriend out of a mess. And God forbid you took a plea to it. Good Lord. These guys will take a plea to protect their girlfriend or their wife from being prosecuted for the false allegation, right? They fall on their sword, and it's a very noble thing to do. But this system is not noble, and it's doubtful that it ever was. Once you have that conviction because you have fallen on your sword, now the next time you're going to prison. You only get one freebie, one free probation, one free diversion program, one free, all right, well, there's no criminal record here, this guy just screwed up. You only get one of those. And after that, every false accusation anyone wants to make against you, you are going to prison. Some guy at a grocery store, minding his own business, is accosted by another guy. So this first guy, he's looking at his celery. Some very hostile person comes up from behind him, starts a row with him, right? Cops get involved because that's what happens at a grocery store when two grown men have an altercation. Well, the cops show up. The guy minding his business, looking at the celery, well, turns out he has a prior conviction. Who do you think the cops are going to believe in this situation? The guy with a clean record who was hostile and actually started the fight, or the guy with a record? People don't think that far ahead. They don't think about the repercussions of taking a plea when they did not commit a crime. And people fall on their swords to protect this person or that person. They refuse to fight. They think, well, my life is falling apart. I've got to take this, whatever it is, diversion program, or I've got to get on probation, so whatever it is, to get rid of the case as fast as possible. And they don't think of the repercussions, and not just for their own lives, but for their entire family. So, food for thought. We are out of time. Tiger, you got any parting words this evening before we check out?
No, nothing really, although all I can say is in my own experience, I saw the same thing. People who were innocent of a crime pleading guilty just to get out of jail. In one case, in one case, the guy was just picked up by the cops because he was walking by the street and they thought he was somebody who stole a vehicle. And I looked at the evidence and it was like, yeah, it's clear he never really did it. But this guy, he's looking at me, he's like, I just want to get out of here. This place is awful. I already have a criminal record, so I was just played out. And I'm looking at it and I said, yeah, your record is literally 26 pages long. So yeah. I don't know what, I was just interning at the time, so I don't know what he did ultimately decide, but it was one of those things where that time I could kind of see, it was like, well, that would be the fastest way to get out of it, and you already got a long history.
Yeah, and that's another thing that prosecutors know, that if he has a long history, they can put that long history on the stand. So this guy gets up and he testifies on his own behalf. The prosecutor can be like, well, weren't you convicted of robbery in 2004 or whatever? Weren't you convicted of this, that, and the other? And they know they're going to look like crap and the jury's not going to believe it. So why not just take the plea? Just get it over with, man. You've already got a record. And a lot of these convictions of innocent people, they're on that because, and that's an extreme case where the guy has a long record. But there are other cases where people are just like, yeah, the jury ain't going to believe me, man. And I'm a bad witness. I'm not a good public speaker. The alleged victim is some cute girl or whatever. Like, obviously they're going to believe them, and they take the plea. They don't fight. Man, don't do that to yourselves, guys. On that note, we will continue reading this chapter next week. We'll be back next Monday, 8 p.m. Till then, guys, good night.
Take a look at my life and realize nothing left. 'Cause I've been blasting and laughing so long that everyone thinks my mind is gone. But I never crossed a man that didn't deserve that. To be treated like a punk, that's unheard of. You better watch how you're talking and the way you're walking, 'cause this life will only leave you lined in chalk. Been spending most of life living in the gangster's paradise. I've been spending most of life situation that got me facing. I can't live a normal life. I was raised by the stripes, so I gotta be down with the hood team. Television watching got me chasing. Death ain't nothing but a heartbeat away from living life to a die. I'm here.